Good morning. Happy Friday, everyone. Thanks for joining in with us. We've got Michael from Trello, Natalie from Wildbit, Kieran from HubSpot, Sarah from Meet Edgar here today. These folks all have a lot of experience working remotely and in different types of environments. Some of these folks have been in large companies, some of these folks have been in small companies, some of these folks have been doing in hybrid models, some are in complete remote models. Some are bootstrapped, some are venture funded, some are public companies. So we've got a lot of range of experience here that should make it easy to have an interesting conversation and help you get a feel for how you might approach it in your environment. Because odds are, not all businesses are the same. So we're going to have a lot of different takes on this stuff. First sort of thing, we got about 500 questions on the Wufoo form that I set up. So we had a lot of questions. I went through and organized them all and condensed them down to a few different themes. So we're gonna hit on the top themes, the stuff that seem to be most top of mind for everyone. We also have the Q&A open for Zoom. At least I believe I do. Who knows? I might have got that wrong too. So if it is working, go ahead and try and use the Q&A, and I think you can upvote, downvote questions. And we'll try and get to those if we have some time at the end. And that, I think, covers it. So let's go right into the meat of this stuff. First question I want to dig into, though, is I want to talk a little bit about how to do the transition. So I think, Kieran, I want to ask you first, because I know we talked a few years ago. HubSpot was heavily remote or heavily office-oriented culture. And it's known for its fun office culture. It's good vibes that are happening there. But your team was one of the first, maybe the first, I'm not sure, to start doing remote work. Can you talk a little bit about how you made that transition from predominantly an office culture in your teams to one that is a remote first environment?
Yeah, so we started with a remote team. We started to become more remote just by chance. There was a role in HubSpot that I was asked to do. I couldn't move to Boston to do it, and so they were kind enough to allow me to do it from Dublin. My plans there then were kind of just to hire all of my team in Dublin, and as a team grew, it just ended up that most people were based in the States and were remote to me. And so I just had, we kind of started to figure out remote back in 2016 and 2017. And figuring out remote pre-Zoom was hard. My first call with my team was on GoToWebinar, or no, GoToMeeting, I think. I couldn't even see anyone. I was being introduced to them as here's your new manager. And hey guys, can't see anyone, don't know who any of you are, but whatever. And my first 13 or 14 direct reports were all based in the States. So it was really, really difficult. There are some things that we started to do that I think helped. And they're small little tips. I think one of the things we did pretty early was when we grew to about 20, 25 people, we had this thing called Remote Week, right? And so we allowed people to experience remote without having to commit to it. Because the reality is for remote is that for some personalities, it's actually not that hard of a transition. For other people, it is a very difficult transition. People like to be around other people in the office, and they can kind of get to experience remote without having to commit to doing it straight away. And I think that was really important for us, is because it helped people to be more empathetic to people who were remote and not in the office, in terms of being able to communicate, in terms of how hard it is to do your work when everyone is in an office environment. Maybe you're the only person who's remote on that team. I think that helped. And I think over time, what we noticed was more and more people became not only just comfortable working with people who were remote and more empathetic and knowing how to communicate with them and understanding what that was like, but they actually started to like it and enjoy it themselves, because they had this kind of transition that wasn't, over the course of 24 hours, it helped them to transition to it in a way where they could kind of do it at their own pace and start to find that there was actual real benefits to it. And so when we kind of fast forward to today, so out of my 65 to 70 marketers that I manage, I would say half of them are fully remote, from their homes. Other people are in office, but spend a lot of their time working remotely. And then most of the people are remote to me. And so I don't know if it's the way I think about presenting. People ask me, how do I get better at presenting? And I always think about that as just, it's practice. right? There's no shortcuts. You go through the period when you're not a very good presenter, then you go to the period where you're a good presenter, but you're not very good at being a storyteller, and then you kind of get progressively better. And that's what I think we evolved, how we evolved in remote. I'm sure that we were not very good at being a remote team to begin with, but we stayed with it because we believe it is a better option for people who want to live that kind of lifestyle and have a great life around their work. And we took those kind of those pain points and tried to transition into, or took those times when it was painful and tried to learn from them and just try to create a better experience for everyone involved.
I love it. Love it. Now, Natalie, you all also, on the Wildbit blog, you talked a little bit about this, where in the end of last year, you all downsized your office. This made the intentional decision to have less space in Philly. Can you talk a little bit about why you all made that decision, what you noticed in your own business that allowed you to commit more to the remote setup?
Sure. So we've been remote since day one. So the very first one, so we turned 20 in October. So, you know, kind of the journey has always been remote. We ended up with a Philly office when we started to have a bunch of Philly folks that were going to, Chris and I live in Philly. And so we had folks that were living in Philly too. And they were like, well, let's all work together. And so we had this kind of transition to hybrid where people wanted to be able to come into the office and see each other. And hybrid is a challenging it's a lot of work to make sure that you are remote first. So we kind of went through this whole transition early on where we realized how less productive we were when we were in the office from having been fully remote, and also that we were making decisions together in that office that wasn't kind of permeating through the whole company, and that became really obviously challenging. So we, in 2012, 13, I guess we went fully remote first, but we still had a physical space. And when we moved out of this we had 10,000 square feet and there was only like 8 people in Philly, which was ridiculous. But we had private dedicated offices for everybody because everything was around this remote first culture of being very productive and having your own focused the space to be very focused. We downgraded that to like a small little, what we call like a Wildbit co-working space, because what we realized was people really did prefer to work from home and just needed every once in a while a place to come in to have just a change of scenery, a change of place. So we are now in a co-working space where they've built us out a private space where we have dedicated offices. We have 5 private offices. So every once in a while people come in and they'll work the day here, but they still kind of feel like they're in their own little cube, but they have the energy around them. So what had happened to the old office was in 10,000 square feet, people would come in and if nobody was there, it was actually depressing. It wasn't like there was no, you kind of show up and you're like, I don't know if anybody's going to be here. And why do we have all this space and I'm all alone and what am I doing for lunch? And it just kind of was like a waste of money and energy. The co-working space has been really cool because even if you come in and you're alone, you have the energy of other people around you, right? Other companies, other teams, people just freelancing outside. You go to the coffee and there's somebody there. So it's kind of created a nice hybrid, but we really just call this the Wildbit co-working space. And like I come in and there's nobody here.
Yeah, I love that. Now, Michael, you all at Trello have a very remote friendly, sort of remote first environment. You joined Atlassian a few years ago, who is mostly offices. Now, granted, a lot of offices across the world. How has that changed the dynamic for remote at Trello? And have you found that Atlassian has become more remote friendly? And how have they made some of that transition, if so?
Yeah, I mean, well, today, almost the entire company is remote right now.
Yeah.
When we were working, we have a hybrid model as well. We've sort of been most like kind of half remote, half not remote. In New York City, we had kind of a headquarters. And actually over time, as we just were hiring, it kind of crept up. The remote piece went up to almost 70 or 80% for the Trello team. When we joined Atlassian, there were actually more remote workers at Atlassian, which is a much bigger company, than there were at Trello. But they were spread out throughout the organization. And I think like that was one of the learnings there, which is that part of being successful at working remotely, you have to adopt the remote first mentality, right? Like, and so if you're the random person on the team that's in the office, you feel it. And so like we had learned that because once you get to 50%, 60% remote, you have to adopt the way that you're working. And there's, your office becomes like Slack and Zoom and where you're managing work and Trello or Confluence or something like that. But the that shift was, I think, you know, I'd be in meetings with people in Sydney or San Francisco, and I'd be in a conference room with other people in the meeting, and I would dial into Zoom so that my face was even with everyone else's, you know, so you don't end up with like one face and then all the people in the conference room around the table. And they were like, why are you doing that? Because we already have a camera on the entire room. And I'm like, I just want to make, put us all on the same level playing field. They're like, oh, that's really cool. So it was sort of like this, you know, people started to learn like, oh, okay, I get it. I understand how we can put everyone on the same footing. So there's been a lot of kind of learnings both from Trello to Atlassian. And I think even when most of our US offices and some of the non-US offices right now are work from home, we've closed some of the offices. So I created a channel in Slack. I was like, go to pound remote, and anyone that's struggling with this, we'll try to give you tips. And of course that channel just started filling up with stuff.
I love it. So the most popular question we got by far coming into this event was, how do we have fun? How do we stay engaged? How do we build morale? How do we prevent loneliness, isolation? For a lot of us, the office can be a fun place. It can be a place where we make friends. We feel like we have a sense of community, a sense of purpose, a sense of mission. I want to hear from all of you on this, but Sarah, you know, Edgar has been remote, I think, from the get-go. Can you talk a little bit about how you all do some of that?
Sure. Yeah, we've been remote since the very beginning. So, you know, we kind of like built things out as we added people one at a time and sort of saw like where something was lacking and where we might need to put some additional, you know, support in place. So I think, you know, realistically, I think if you look at the way your office functions in like a non-remote setting, you kind of have to gauge things from like how things actually happen. So if your social atmosphere in your office environment is like generally really like reliant on spontaneity and like people just like bumping into each other, you kind of have to create that a little bit for your team members, which I think kind of on the face of it sounds like really honestly, it doesn't sound very fun. But for us, it's like more about prompting those conversations to happen. So we have, you know, general like water cooler Slack conversation, but we'll put in like a question of the day so that people can like, you know, if they need a break from their work, can just like pop in and answer those questions. And it's like not totally necessary to do that constantly. You can like have that channel on mute and just pop in when you want to take a break. So, you know, we like try to do things like that. I also think like trying different kinds of activities that like maybe you haven't thought of before. So we like to do like movie days every once in a while. We'll like stream a movie and have everybody watch it at the same time. Like you can kind of be doing something on the side if you'd like to, but there's a movie going and some chat. So I think you kind of have to just get a little bit creative with like what you normally do in an office environment and try to find the remote like way to not necessarily recreate the exact same activity, but recreate sort of the environment that caused it. So I think, you know, we try to get like different ideas from folks on the team for what they'd like to see or like what they miss or something that like happened in a previous work environment that they really enjoyed. You know, so we've come up with things like synchronous food deliveries and things like that to happen. So I think, you know, honestly, if you just get open-minded about it and really view the social aspect of the work as part of work itself, like I think in a normal office environment, a lot of times these kinds of activities are not really seen as like the best way to spend, you know, 45 minutes of your day. But when you're working remote, it like 100% becomes something that's really, really important to do. And, you know, the more time you can spend having kind of like a silly conversation in Slack, the easier it is when you get on a video call for the first time with folks on your team and like have to start diving into work right away. It's like you feel a little bit like you know all of the people who are on the video call. And I think it really just does help to lubricate the actual work part of it as well.
Yeah. What about the rest of you all? How are you all like trying to create sort of a fun, engaged, you know, culture, helping people fight loneliness, isolation, so that, you know, remote actually feels like you're part of something?
I think for us, kind of what Sarah said, I call it like the intentional water cooler.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you know, because I was like, well, how do you get those conversations, those things going? So we do a lot of that as well. We, one of the most transformative, really simple things that we did that I I think is amazing is every Monday morning, an automated question goes out and says, how was your weekend? Anything you want to share? And that has like, just people post pictures of their hobbies, their kids, their, games, or, whatever was going on. And that, then people have conversations, and that creates a lot of energy. Obviously not in this environment, but we do retreats, like having those face-to-face conversations. We're not going to have retreats today, but having that opportunity to get to know each other. I think the one thing for us that's really critical is we do maximize focus work at Wildbit. Like, it's very important to us because we try to stay off of Slack. So that's kind of why it has to be intentional, because we don't really rely on general or anything like that, because most people just keep Slack closed all day. So for them, it's really just having those moments. We'll do like a Friday demo day. People can pop in. We don't work on Fridays, but people can pop in on a Friday demo day and have a chance to just share something. I think last weekend somebody was sharing their wine collection and kind of teaching people on wine. And so I think there's just like I think that intent, right? You can't just, I've seen remote teams say that they really struggle with it because they're like, well, we have a general channel and people just say hi. But if you're distributed, somebody's hi is at 9 a.m., somebody's at 2 p.m., somebody says bye, somebody says BRB, and like your whole general channel is just like a status update of whether somebody's sitting in front of their computer or not. Like, there needs to be somebody tasked or some culture, a part of your culture that's tasked with making sure that those become real actions.
Right now, if you're switching to work from home and there's somebody that does that in the office, this is a great opportunity for them to start thinking about that. One of the things we did is similar to these other ideas, but I second Sarah's point, which is it feels kind of clunky to try to create like a space for serendipitous conversation, but it can be really helpful. So we had these things called Mr. Rogers, where once your team gets big enough, then it's kind of like you could have people working, and the day-to-day work, they don't have any interaction with other people in the company. So they don't even know who those people are. In a normal office space, you might run into them. You might sit across from lunch. So you have to create a moment for like an engineer to meet a salesperson or something like that. So we were scheduling them. We would have little Zoom meetings, and we let people schedule them, which it was like that little bit of friction meant that it was hard to do. And we realized we did these town halls once a month. We get everyone into the Zoom. And then Zoom's breakout feature will just send you can make random, you'll break out and you tell it how many people you want in a room. It just sends random people to the room. And so that was a really great way of just like extending the town hall, because everyone was already there, right? We're not working. And so it's like, hey, 15, 20 minutes, let's just break out into rooms and just introduce yourself, talk about whatever. It's not work related, right? Like just a moment to have that conversation. So it's not as serendipitous as being in person, but we created those moments for people to try to get to know each other.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing. Like, when people talk about trying to recreate the office environment, you can kind of break it into two parts, which is there's certain people just crave that in-person contact. And then a lot of what people are asking for is, how do I get to know my team outside of work, which is harder when you're remote, because you can't, remote can't recreate in-person contact. And if you miss that, there's little you can do in remote to recreate that. What you can do is recreate moments where you can get to know your team members better. You can get to know your team members outside of work, which is like their interests, their hobbies. So a lot of the things we've talked about is, how do you get to actually spend time with people in a remote environment and talk about and discuss things and engage in a way that's not focused on your work. Things that I've been trying to do, like all of the things that were mentioned are basically the things that we try to do. The other thing I've been trying to figure out is how to do online team events, like fun events. So we did an online group quiz using Zoom and Zoom's breakout features, like putting people into breakout rooms, conferring about the questions, coming back. I had to organize that. It was so painful. I've been looking for a company who can actually organize team events for distributed teams. If someone wants to set up that company and come back to me, that would be pretty cool. The other thing we try to talk to people, managers who manage remote workers, is spend the first 5 minutes of your meeting just asking questions about that person's life, because everything in remote is on scheduled time, and it always feels like it's about work, because that's just the nature of when you're online. You're going to generally talk about work more often than not, because you don't have those organic conversations, and you're trying to facilitate and recreate those moments where you talk about other things. So we have similar things around Slack, which is when Game of Thrones is out, one of our most popular Slack channels was Game of Thrones Slack channels, and to all of the other speakers, they're very similar things in terms of how we try to recreate those moments.
Yeah, we had a similar thing. We used to talk about the Game of Thrones. We actually have a naming convention for Slack that helps us at Zapier, where all of our off-topic channels are prefixed with fun. So that sort of is a visual signal to the person coming into the channel that, hey, this is actually an off-topic channel. And you'll see things like gardening, parenthood, home ownership, which is arguably not fun, but like cats and dogs and other types of things where people can congregate around some shared interests. And, you know, these are not like, it's not like people show up in these rooms and just chat all day long or anything, but it's a place where they can sort of show off a picture of the new puppy that they got. And then everyone is, oh, that's cute. And they have a good conversation around it, and helps people feel a little bit engaged. We do the same thing that, you know, Michael's talking about. We don't call him Mr. Rogers, we call him Donut Chats. There's a bot called donut.ai that can auto schedule these for you. We also have, you know, we're fully remote. So we also have city channels. So there's, if you look in Slack, anything prefixed with city is where people are located. So those people will often organize a time to go to a coffee shop, whatnot, to get to know each other a little bit more. Obviously, you probably shouldn't do that right now, but it's a good tip when we're not in a pandemic. So those types of things go a long way. And I think the other thing is realize that like people on the team often have just as good, if not better ideas than you probably do around how to create this stuff. Early on in Zapier, one of our support members, it was like a Friday afternoon, things were starting to slow down in support. We were getting to all of our questions and she says, hey, let's have a dance party. And it's like, how are we going to do a dance party in a remote company? Well, she says, well, here's what you'll do. We'll pick a song on Spotify, play it, record yourself doing a little dance, upload it to Giphy, and then just put the GIF on in Slack. And then she created a huge montage of everyone dancing at once to this thing. And it's sort of silly, but it ends up being like really fun because you get to see people pulled their kids into it. They had their dogs in with it. It was just like a really cool little way to sort of get to experience, something together, even though you're many, many miles apart. So there's a lot of ways I think you can help people feel engaged, prevent loneliness, prevent isolation, even though, you know, we're mostly just working out of our homes. I love that. Other thing that's big on everyone's minds, I think, is productivity. Productivity is something everyone's just sort of, how does this work in a remote environment? I think managers are concerned around, hey, how do I know that it's happening? How do I know that work is getting done? If I can't see folks, do I know that it's working? I think on the sort of employee side, a lot of folks are concerned like, hey, how does my boss know that I'm getting stuff done? I want to prove it to them. In fact, you'd see questions like, I feel like I'm actually working overtime a lot just to prove to my boss that I'm being productive. So you see some like unintentionally, I think, not good behavior that comes out of this like miscommunication around what's getting done here. So how do you all think about productivity? I think perhaps we can answer this in like two different ways. One is like in a normal environment, how are you thinking about productivity? And then two might be like, hey, how are you thinking about it today, given that, you know, everyone's sort of day-to-day is being quite disruptive by just sort of the current events?
I think the second question is the most interesting because I think like the answer is like, it's hard to be productive right now, right? Kids are out of school, they're home. People aren't used to these, this new way of working. So they're adjusting to the tools, the style, the process. And so people just have to understand that this is going to be an adjustment. And while I would hope it was just like a week or two, I think it might be a little bit longer than that. So I think that there's just there has to be a lot of trust right now in understanding, trying to come up with new routines and things like that in the current situation. But to your other point around like normally when people have those routines and things, the quicker that you can adjust to them and get them set up, being open, transparent, all that kind of stuff. That's all the tools that we use, right? We're using Google Docs or Confluence or Trello or Slack or Zoom. Like these are all about moving your office from the physical world to the virtual world, right? And all the tools that have been developed over the last 10 years make that super easy, right? So you can actually, I think, like actually now, the concern that people aren't as productive is almost backwards because your productivity can be measured by the output. instead of the button that's in the seat, right? Like you walk in the office, see, oh, everyone's here at 6 a.m., right? You know, and it's like, what are they doing? You know, there's like, but now like actually the documents, the assets, the creation of the work can be, it's happening in those tools. And so you can time together with Zapier, you can, you know, like all these things so that you can get that information in front of the people that want to see it. When you're talking in Slack, you're also talking, you're having that conversation, and so many people can be privy to it, which is great, right? It's easier to, these channels are mostly open. And I actually think that's one of the pitfalls. People move to Slack, they start using it, and they treat it like email. They're making lots of DMs, lots of private channels. And it's like, nope, you got to switch to be more transparent, because that's the blocker and the friction. That's the advantage of working remotely, is you can disseminate this information. There's only one caveat I would say to that, which is that if you kind of start to feel like there's a miscommunication happening or some kind of conflict happening in a chat channel, and you're kind of like going back and forth like the flame war, right? Like where you're like, and you're typing the thing. We had this kind of, we taught ourselves to like escalate to Zoom, because like chat cannot be great for that, because now you're having an argument in front of the entire office, right? And people can kind of sense it, and you're missing all the emotional cues. You lose the trust that you built in the, you know, in the Mr. Rogers or the donut chats. Like you kind of lose that in you're interpreting it, you know, you're not assuming any positive intent or whatever. So you have to be careful to be like, okay, this is going sideways, let's go to Zoom. And then you go back to the room and be like, so we worked it out. Like, here's what we, you know, but anyway.
I think too, like if we were to switch now, you almost, to me, like remote work only works if you build trust. Like that's like the key, that whole question of productivity, or how does my boss know I'm working? How do I know my employee's working? Like that's all like a trust factor. And what we learn on teams that have been remote for a long time is you kind of build that trust, and the faster you get to it, right, then at that point, we don't need to know that your butt's in your seat. I don't care. Like for me personally, I don't care how long you work at all. All I care about is like we make an agreement that this is the promise we're making to each other. And if we deliver on that promise, awesome, right? So I think the current situation, right, these teams that have not maybe built that trust virtually, that they built that trust because they see like this person show up at 6 and this person show up at 6 and they stay till 6, and that must mean that they're working. To me, the fastest way to build that trust is to really create really clear goals and shorten them as much as you can, so that you're delivering and getting feedback in a much shorter loop. Like right now, on our team, I would never say like, let's check in daily, right? Like let's have a stand up. That's just not the way our culture is. Like we want to give people as much quiet time, and especially on a distributed team, on a time zone distributed team. But today I would say like, let's create small accomplishments that we all agree to, that we can deliver on. So I, manager, can see you're delivering on them, and I, employee, have communicated clearly enough that you know that I'm working on it. And that can slowly transition to maybe longer term goals and things like that. But I could totally see the argument for daily stand-ups, right? Or for shorter docs, right? Like a single pager that's like, this is the goal for the week or the month, and this is what your contribution is. And like everybody's in agreement with it, so that there is less of that kind of confusion around, is this what I should be working on? Is this what they're expecting from me? How often should I communicate? I think it's a different time, and I would not normally suggest that to my team. If they're listening, they're like, what are you, crazy? But like there is that whole, you know, we just have to build that remote trust. Managers sitting there right now and saying like, I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what they're doing, right? Because they're not watching you. And you're kind of like hopefully getting your work done. And I think there's an opportunity here to just really take things down to like much more smaller deliverables.
Yeah. I think you bring up go ahead, Sarah. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, I think you know, for us, it's like the other half of that is just like being really clear as a manager with what your expectations actually are. Like, I genuinely think, you know, the vast majority of people want to do a good job at their job. And if they don't know what that looks like, or they don't know what you think their day, you know, what you're expecting their day to be, like if they don't know that about your expectations, then they're going to have a really hard time meeting those expectations. So, you know, realistically for us, it's just like, we try to keep everything as like, basically just like state the absolute obvious. You know, if you have this expectation that something's going to happen by Thursday or something like that, then just be really clear about that, and make it really clear as well from your team that like, hey, you know, the second it seems like this might not happen, like let's have a conversation about it. And, you know, that's fine, but this is just like what I was thinking when I'm putting it out there, you know? So it's really hard to like that trust kind of has to go both ways. I mean, you want to make sure you trust what your team is doing, but your team also needs to know that you're not going to kind of change the goalposts on them, somewhere where they can't see that happening. And I think that is also really supported by just being very, very transparent. Like all of our meeting notes, we try to take a record of like what happened in meetings. And then, like Michael was saying earlier, bringing them back to Slack just to say like, here's what happened, here's what was decided. So, for us, it's just about like leaving evidence. Like, so when work happens in the day, like there's a shred of evidence of that happening. It's on a meeting note, it's in a comment, in your task manager, or something's written in Slack about what's happened, and, everything kind of just falls in line with the expectations that you'd already set, then, you're really good to go at that point, or you can course correct in like tiny ways as needed. So it's not a huge deal.
How about you all, Kieran?
Yeah, I think I would echo everything people said. I think one of the things, most common mistakes you managers make when they're managing remotely is they kind of start to micromanage, right? So the way that you generally manage is you'll have trust with some of your employees, like they're pretty skilled, they have experience, that they're going to do their work, and you've communicated certain check-ins. And then there's other people who you need to be more hands-on with. Maybe they're less experienced. Maybe they're just struggling to do that thing, or it's not going the way you want. So you're kind of more hands-on with those people. And the way that you manage should not change because these people are now remote and you can't see them. And I think there's nothing more demotivating to someone that is used to have a lot of freedom and a lot of trust to then go remote and start to be micromanaged. And I think that's the thing managers should be cautious of, is like lead with trust and only start to really jump in and ask for a lot more communication, and to be more hands-on if that person is not doing the things you want to do. As long as you've laid out clear goals, accountability, and your communication, how you expect to be communicated to the progress, how you expect progress to be communicated, you should just allow that person to do that thing and only jump in if it's not being done the way you want it to be done.
Yeah. There's a great book called High Output Management by Andy Grove, who was the head of Intel for a long time. In the book, he talks about this concept called task relevant maturity. And what that means is that you can have a high performer who is working really well in one area, but when shifted to something new, you can't guarantee that they will immediately be successful in that new area. It takes a little bit. Their task relevant maturity over here is really high, but over here, they don't have any of it. So it could take a bit. And I think that applies to the situation we're in right now, where our environment has shifted underneath us. And so we're in that position where every one of us, our task relevant maturity is pretty low. And so it's going to take a bit of time to figure this out. This is where Natalie's tip, I think, is really important, to say, hey, let's come up with a set of checkpoints. What is it, daily? Is it half day? Maybe start with, more regular than not, just while we're still getting used to the work. That way we can course correct really quick early on if we find that something's working or something's not working. But as we build up more of a routine, as we build up more of a trust around it, you can see that task relevant maturity going up, and you can sort of expand those checkpoints out where, at Zapier now, we do, managers do one-on-ones weekly with their folks, and that's plenty. You sort of know what's up. You say, hey, what's going to happen this week? What's top priority for you? And then by the end of the week, they're like, hey, the top priority thing has happened. And sort of that trust gets built really regularly, and you don't feel a sense of having to just check in like every hour or every day just to know, like, is it happening? I don't know. And this works really well for any type of person who's in any type of new situation. So if you're trying to onboard a new hire who's never worked remotely, you can do this with them and say, hey, let's have a little more regular checkpoints. If someone's shifting roles, maybe they're moving from support into marketing or engineering and they haven't done that stuff before, you're probably going to want to just have a little more regular checkpoints with them as you build that trust, as you build those routines. And that helps them grow their skills and be a little more, just get the guidance that they probably actually want and need in sort of an uncertain new scenario. And as you sort of both get used to that, you can have a dialogue and say, hey, we're going to just, we're going to do this checkpoints less regularly. High Output Management is that book.
I think selfishly too, like I almost I'm so excited for all these kind of more traditional companies, especially I think we have some in the audience that are coming from big corporate kind of companies. I think there's an opportunity here to learn how to be a manager that values output, not time in seat. And like, if we really talk about what, to me, the value of remote work is that trust, that ability to empower every person to manage their time, to manage their days and their responsibilities around like an output. Like I always think like we make a promise to each other. It's a right. I'm going to deliver this thing, and if I can't deliver it, I'm going to communicate to you why, and we're going to have this, and like I don't care when you do it. Right? You should be able to work flexibly. You should be able to comfortably get up and go do your laundry if that you need a kind of a mental break. You should be able to go take a long walk. And I should be, as a manager, comfortable saying, like, you're going to tell me if you're stuck, and if not, you're going to deliver on this thing that we agreed to. And everybody should work like that, right? It's not a remote thing. It should transcend. But we, in these physical spaces, I think oftentimes it's lazier. It's easier to be like a lazy manager and really just say like, my people show up, they're great, they're here 9 to 5, they're here 7 to 7, and like that must mean that they're good, and we get the output we get. And most of the time, I worked in corporate only for 9 months, and like I was shocked that like a 60% output was like the most amazing thing in the world, right? Because that everybody's kind of averaging out. So I don't know, I'm hopeful that people start experiencing this a little bit, and then they bring it back to the office, because we're not going to expect that everybody's going to stay remote, right? But we can hope that they learn something in that process.
Yeah, you had mentioned like earlier about employees who were reaching out saying like, how do I prove to my manager that I'm doing good work? I feel like it's the same way. It's a good opportunity, I think, for employees too. Like, if you are just really used to just showing up and like that's the core part of your day, and not that like most people are just like punching the time clock and not working hard, but you really do have to kind of like change the way you are saying, okay, how do I know at the end of the week that like I made some good productive progress this week? What is the evidence of that going to be, and how can I share that back with the rest of my team? And I feel like the habit of doing that, the habit of like stepping away and like actually reflecting back on the work that you did, is one that like, whether you're remote or not, just makes you so much more focused on the end goal. And like, I think it provides for you as an employee, like a really good self check to make sure like, oh, wow, like, did I get off track here? And it's like, it's a really great way to catch yourself. And, overall, I think just in general in a workplace, like that's just going to be a positive thing no matter what. That's just how you're going to get to the goals that you want to hit a little bit faster.
I want to comment on something real quick. Michael's doing something interesting in the chat. He's dropping links. So the attendees can all chat as well inside the sidebar. This happens in like our Zoom all hands at Zapier, where there's a little bit of a side chat that's going on. People are supplementing the main convo with links, resources. A lot of our attendees have expertise in these areas too. So don't be shy. Feel free to just chime in, share a link, drop a resource. Add your own personal anecdotes and expertise in these areas, because you all have as much to contribute to this conversation than perhaps as we do too. And that's one of the cool things you can do inside of Zoom, is you can sort of have a main chat, but also have a little bit of a side chat.
The thing I noticed, I think that the default, it says 2 and then it says panelists. So when all the attendees type things, I think by default it just goes to us. I don't think the other attendees. You have to change that little drop down to all panelists and
attendees. That's where I've got mine at. So there you go. Here it comes.
There it is. Yeah.
Awesome, folks. So let's shift to a new topic here. Natalie, you called out, hey, we have some perhaps quite large companies in the attendance. I even saw in the chat someone says, hey, I'm from government. Obviously that's as big as it gets. A lot of us have been forced into this situation without much planning. We may not have the technology. We may not have the tools set up. We may not have even done 1 ounce of planning for the situation we're in. So try and put yourselves in those shoes. And what are the technology that you think people need? What's like the MVP, the sort of minimum viable, setup that you need for a home office? How are you coping with school closures? How are you coping with other folks being in what's now your working environment and also your living environment? How do you think about that stuff? How are you thinking about that in your own companies? Because surely you all have parents that are working for you that now are like, I have 3 kids running around and my spouse is at home and stealing my spot where I work from normally. Like everything's been disrupted. So how do you think about trying to set yourself up to get a good foundation that if this does last as long as it might last, we can get some sense of normalcy?
I was just thinking about how even if you have a plan for normal remote working, it's all upended now because daycare's closed, schools, you know, so I think there's sort of, I was trying, this is a tough answer, right? Because there's just so many things right now that you have to take care of that like the other way of living and working was like helping, you had a system for that. And so now there's like a new system. And so it's, I think just personally, I've, you know, sat down with my wife and it's kind of like, okay, when am I responsible for the kids? How do we coordinate so that we know that they did the things that they need to do while they're home, you know, like not just sat in front of their iPads, but then at the end of the day. And so she made a little chart that was like reading, writing, you know, clean up, and like they get stickers for the day and stuff like that. So
high output management for kids.
Yeah. and I know if she did reading, I could just go and look at the chart and be like, okay, I'm going to do writing and spend 30 minutes when I have time. But it's like, that's even, you know, because we're fortunate enough where we're both here, right? Like if you're a single parent or something like that, it's like right now you might just have to like be really understanding for people's situations and how they're going to try to figure it out. But like maybe people can take, you know, if they can switch days, or that somebody can take the afternoon and somebody take the morning. But you got to find that routine, and it's going to be different for everyone, I think. And I think in that short term, it might just be that the amount that we're able to contribute to work gets kind of squeezed a little bit because there's just so many other things right now in the world that are like taking our attention and time, which is different than a normal or remote working situation where you can figure it out and devote your day and, you know, get into a groove. Right now it's just a little bit up in the air.
Yeah, I think for us, it's just like, you know, it hasn't been super impactful to our day-to-day until kids started staying home from school, and things like that started happening, and regular childcare wasn't as available as it was before. So for right now, for us, you know, usually we usually like to work, you know, with pretty clear like working hours for everybody. Everybody knows when people will be here, and we're just having to be really flexible with those schedules right now, and really being patient with folks who like just, you know, unexpectedly have to step away from their desk. You know, maybe there was a scheduled meeting or something, but they've got to move things around a little bit because they have to run and take care of some family stuff. So for us right now, it's just a matter of understanding that things are really outside of the normal routine, and you know, the expectation can't really be the same, that people are able to get as much done. And you know, realistically, even if you don't have the kids or the spouses or like, you know, the menagerie of pets like running around the house, it's also just, it's a really noisy time out there right now. And I think, you know, we have to just give a lot of space for people to just kind of be, you know, emotionally dealing with their own stuff, like whether it's happening in their house or not. Just in terms of, you know, basically the overwhelm. I mean, I think sometimes people like to find solace in just like finding productive work and getting things done in the day. And sometimes people just like are not able to do that. And, you know, we really have to remember that work is a big part of everybody's life, but it is absolutely not anyone's entire life. So, you know, I think it's just helpful to try to not be try to be like the one thing in their life that's not a huge problem for them right now.
I've been thinking a lot about just, there's so many questions right now about productivity and like, how do we stay productive?
Mm-hmm.
And I've been thinking a lot about maybe we should redefine productivity for a little bit. Like these are not normal times. And even on a company, you know, like I sent an email to the team this morning, like we're remote. We've always been remote. So for us, it should be business as usual. I couldn't get anything done yesterday, right? Like there was just such a difficult, like that just load, the cognitive load. For companies that are bigger, that maybe have more response, like for our team, I can say like we can slow down a little bit. Nothing drastic is going to happen. I do think there's a value in maybe as leadership teams to regroup and say what's really important. Like what are the things that are actually important to get done, and can we rally folks around each other? Like if there is, you know, a single parent and they can't, you know, maybe they can only get 2 hours of a big project done. Like, is there somebody else on the team who can jump in, who maybe their work isn't as urgent right now and they can kind of kick in and help out? And like as a company, we all do a lot of things, but we don't necessarily need to do all of them at once. And maybe they're not as urgent in the next 3 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever it is. And really just create a culture of supporting each other and supporting the business to be what it needs to be right now, right? It doesn't need to be the same thing that it was 2 weeks ago, because it's not for anybody, you know. And so how do we kind of adjust in a way that supports folks. Like the single parent thing, I'm very lucky I have help at home, but the kids are running around and they're like, what do you mean? Like, play with me. And I've been working remote my whole career, and they still don't get it. Like, I'm home. Why aren't you home? Why are you working? And so all of that just has to be taken into account.
Yeah. It's funny when you think about tools that Zoom may be the single most important thing to world economies right now, to make sure that they can keep their bandwidth going.
Yeah. It's been interesting to watch inside of Zapier, like as different folks sort of adapt and try and find ways to work. And I think, we've talked a lot about like the flexibility that remote provides. This is an area where I think we're just still all learning from each other. We had one parent say, hey, me and my spouse are taking shifts with the kids. So like they'll take them for 3 hours. I'll take them for 3 hours. That way we all get at least a little bit of work done. Maybe it's not the full extent that we would have done, but it's something. I've seen people who have, in their communities, maybe they'll say, hey, my next door neighbor also has kids. And so we're like tag teaming on this together a little bit. So it'll be interesting just to see how different folks evolve, what community resources sort of pop up. I think one of the great things about humanity is that we tend to be resilient in times like this. And so I think we're going to see a lot of creative solutions pop up. And hopefully us as, folks who work in these environments can sort of try and take advantage of that stuff and encourage our teams to sort of take advantage of that, to find at least some semblance of normalcy sooner rather than later. Another really popular question: whiteboarding, brainstorming. This one I get all the time. It came up again this time. How do you do whiteboarding? How do you do brainstorming? Do you do it at all? Do you try and do it? Or if you don't do it, what do you do instead? How do you replicate that sort of in office, like we're riffing on an idea, trying to get something going?
We've actually, and it's a plug for a company, but we do use them we use Miro. We started to use Miro a lot for whiteboarding. With a lot of our creative process, we've kind of mapped out, I don't know if you've ever read the sprint design. I can't recall his name, but it's from a person who used to be in Google, kind of invented this way or created this model of getting to creative idea within 1 week, from idea to execution or to minimal viable version. It's for a product, but we're kind of using it for creative campaigns. And you can kind of get templates in there. It's pretty cool, actually. You can kind of drag things around. You can add commentary. You can upvote things. It's the nearest I've got to being able to do like a in-person riffing on an idea to date.
How do you all do it at your companies?
We kind of don't really do whiteboarding in the traditional sense. I think we've just gotten a little bit creative with some of the brainstorming exercises that we do. We really like to give people chances to generate some ideas alone or in smaller groups, and then, share them with the larger group. I remember a long while back when we were actually thinking about the naming and the branding of our actual company, we all kind of in secret worked on what our plan was going to be, and then we'd pass them over so that somebody else could build on it a little bit and then share them with the team. So for us, it hasn't really been, and we've kind of just figured out ways to build our method for brainstorming and generating new ideas, just a little bit absent of that. But in the times when we want to kind of be sharing on a piece of paper, Zoom actually, I think, does have a pretty neat whiteboard feature that you can use. We don't really rely very heavily on it, though.
Oh,
Here it comes.
Oh, wow. Never seen that before.
It's under share screen, and then it's one of the screens you can share is just whiteboard.
Yeah, it's a pretty rudimentary one I found. Zoom,
draw.
Yeah, it's draw. But yeah, it's like MS Paint style.
Yeah.
There's what would we say, Miro, and then the other one, Mural, which is a little bit like that. The whiteboard that I just put up in Zoom is like you said, is super rudimentary. It's on the total freeform. You just want to draw. It's like an actual whiteboard in that office.
Yeah.
And then Miro kind of move a little bit closer to more you could get little objects in here, like little cars or boxes and arrows and stuff. With charting, you can use Lucid Chart for that and stuff. But
yeah. There's a bunch of tools. You can Google around for this stuff, give them a try. A lot of them have free trials, or even free versions. So these things are not too tough to find. A whole bunch of different ones that might suit your individual circumstances or needs. Zapier, honestly, we use Google Docs. You just write it out, and then you can use indentation and spacing and stuff to get a sense for hierarchy.
Comment on everything if you
Yeah, you can
want to,
comment
like
on a
a
lot of
separate
stuff.
conversation wants to pop up.
Totally. Google Docs has shapes, so you can put shapes and stuff in there. Yeah, it's very rudimentary, but it gets the job done. So I find it to be really good. Last topic. So we've got a few more minutes here. One of the things I've noticed happening on Twitter recently is everyone is sharing their personal productivity tips. Everyone's sharing how to make it work. And oftentimes it's like the exact opposite advice. Some people are like, I got to get up and shower and get dressed and eat a full breakfast for the day. Others are like, yes, wear my pajamas, be comfortable. I'll be super productive that way. It's kind of the version of what I like to call, it's like the version of people who are like, to be successful, you have to wake up 5 a.m. and read 700 books a day. And these are the ways you've got to do it. Anyway, all of this stuff is personal. What works for you? So I'm curious for you all, just so you can give people different ideas of what routines might look like, what personal productivity might look like. What are the things that you all find just make it work for you? You're like, this is my routine. It works for me. May not work for others, but I like it.
At the moment, it's my Calm app and wine, but before switching to Calm app and wine, I actually tried everything. I'm a person that gets obsessed by trying all of the advice online. And I used to have morning routines. I've done like every single version of a productivity list you could do. I still find when I'm at my most productive is I've just planned out my day the day before. So like I have a clear to-do list. I've stack ranked it and I put time in my calendar to do those things. So I blocked out time to actually get work done. And then if I do those things, I'm generally actually quite productive. Like there's in everyday life, there's some days that you're on it and some days that you're less so. But the other thing that I've tried that really works is I'm definitely a person, there's actually a scientific study about like people who can work in silence and people who need music to be productive. I'm definitely someone who needs music. But what I do is I listen to the same playlist all the time. So I'm so used to the songs that I'm not trying to like actually listen to words or anything. And so it's kind of in the background. And so I can never listen to new music if I'm actually trying to do productive work. But yeah, I spent years, like I'm actually one of those people who tweets out my productivity and tweeted out my morning routine and then stuck with it for a month and then never done it again. And I realized that I'm actually like just most productive when I keep it very, very simple.
Yeah, I am like I have like no morning routine, which is like I know not advised on Twitter. But yeah, generally speaking, for me, I get my best heads down time done in the afternoons, but that's because I'm on the West Coast and most of my meetings are during the day. So that's just kind of what started out of necessity is now just like kind of how my brain and my body wants to work. I think, it is so different for everybody that I think, you kind of have to just notice about yourself what is energizing and what isn't, and also be able to catch yourself when you're sort of spiraling a little bit. So for me, like the main things that I do to stay productive, in the absence of a morning routine, I generally just kind of like stumble out of bed and get a coffee and get to work. But I like to take little breaks throughout the day. Like I call them sun breaks. Basically, I'll just go outside and kind of just sit outside for 5 or 10 minutes just to like hit the reset button if I feel like I'm hitting like a little bit of a productivity wall, or if I'm getting a little frustrated with something I'm working on. And then at the end of the day is sort of where I have a little bit more structure. Like I find that because my heads down productive time happens in the afternoons, it's really easy for me to get in the zone on something. And then just like now my evening is gone and I just want to work on that thing all night. So I pretty much have to live and die by the clock. At the end of my actual workday, I leave, like I have a ride waiting for me outside of my office or something like that. And I do like a commute before I go, home. I work at home, but, I do a commute before I go home, which is usually I'll just hop outside and go for a jog, or like just something that is like a little bit in between work and home life before I have to like dive into actual home mode. And that's the only thing that really like helps me kind of create that separation between work life and home life and keeps me productive during my actual work day the next day. So
I'll plug one of my favorite books because to your point, Wade, like it's so different and unique for everybody. There's a book called Deep Work by Cal Newport. And I think everybody on my team gets it. And the reason is because I feel like it's a personal responsibility to understand how you are productive and what creates that energy, like Sarah said. So like my routine is I have to like breakfast, coffee in the morning, like make my bed, like the whole thing, get dressed and do all of that. But I need a list of like what I definitely have to hit. And I noticed yesterday when I couldn't really be productive, because again, like it's just such a different energy right now, writing out like, okay, if I just do these like 2 things, then I'll feel like I made some progress on things that are important. And the rest of the time I can just spend reading or being more reactive and just giving yourself permission for that. But otherwise I'll have like my weekly project that I'm trying to hit, or my like daily thing that I really want to get accomplished this, and then maximizing that. So I lead a team, so my calendar can look a little messy sometimes with one-on-ones and things like that. So I'll put it right on the calendar. Like this is my quiet time to accomplish this one thing. And that usually sometimes helps.
Michael, how do you make it happen? Just go to your island?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm trying to think of a way to answer this without self-promotion, because I have my own little personal Trello board, and
you can self-promote. Trello's great. We'll just say it for you.
I have all these little lists, and it's like a list of lists, so it's sort of like I got stuff going on with different projects, and then I have all my love cards, and it's just for me. Like I'm just keeping all my notes in there, just like figuring out what's going on. So I can go back to that. I also have one for the house. So like there's like all the stuff I have to do in the house, and it's like that way. When you get to that point where I forget what it was called, but it's sort of like you get this paralysis, and then but if you can write that stuff down and actually just get it there, then you can sort of move forward because you've broken it. Like you've gotten it out of your head. You sort of don't have all the anxiety of like, I'm holding this all in my head, So for me, it's like always just reminding myself when I feel like I'm just spinning my wheels and I'm going in 1,000 different directions, it's just like put that stuff down.
Yeah.
And then even if I don't get to it, because that probably means it's not high priority, but to just have it there, and then I can let go of it and just keep piling through. Because like right now, the prioritization matrix just gets all messed up, because all of a sudden like the 5-year-old will just show up, right? You're like, oh, I guess that throws 30 minutes that I'm gonna work on that is not happening right now. But
yeah, that's like a David Allen getting
I
things
was just
done
gonna say
thing.
GTD.
I'm a big fan of that as well. Like the brain dump is like, that is the key to my sanity. I feel like sometimes where, if you're just kind of going a little nuts with like just trying to remember like, oh, all of these things I have to get done, it's so helpful to just empty it all out onto a piece of paper or something like that, and not have to have that in your head anymore.
I wanted to like tattoo that, or like put that on my wall. It's like your brain is not a good repository for information, right? Like get it out and then use your brain for thinking creatively. Like I always thought that's like it's a big David Allen thing.
And put it in Trello. Trello's the place where it should go.
Put it in Trello.
There was this is sort of related, but if you just start thinking about like group productivity and things like that, one of the things I noticed is one thing that's been super helpful for us as we've gotten bigger has been more to add a little bit more formality into decision making. And there's this sort of framework that is up on the Atlassian website called a DACI, D-A-C-I, but there's sort of like 4 components to like making the decision. It's just like trying to isolate who those people, like who's driving this decision, who's the actual approver, like this has to be one person, who's contributing, like who actually am I asking to make comments about this, and then who am I just informing? So this is the DACI. So informing, and it's like if you're informed, like I'm not asking for well, you can comment, but it's like I'm not really asking for but it's just adding that formality to decisions has been really helpful, and practicing that. There's a whole bunch of different ways to work with teams, but I found that has been one of the single most productivity tips for us as a group, because it's like sometimes you just have those decisions. It's like, where is that decision, and it's like blocking other people's work, but it's not really clear, and you're kind of it's more of like, oh, conversation. You might in the office, I actually think sometimes that stuff just happens because you have meetings and stuff like that, and you're like, oh, all the stakeholders are here, and so we'll just decide it, and then everyone leaves, and it's kind of like it's decided. You didn't have the formality of having to write it down. But in a virtual space, it's actually really useful to like put that in. You put it in Google Doc or Confluence page, whatever you want. It's just sort of like just a record, and then people can comment, add stuff to it, and then you kind of say like, okay, it's decided. This is the thing. This is where we're going. And now you have an asset there that people can refer to.
We use the exact same model.
Yeah, we do. We use Dacey's as well. They're helpful. All right, folks, we are right at the top of the hour. Actually, 1 minute past. Thanks everyone for coming out. Hopefully this was useful. The recording will go up online. We'll make sure to add a bunch of resources that were shared from the chat as well. We'll try and expand on some of these topics too. The Zapier team is going to write more about how we do it. I'm sure these folks have plans in place to share some of their stuff out as well. Most of us have written something about how we make remote work actually work. I know we weren't able to get to every last question. There's things that are still out there that are left unanswered. Keep seeking for those answers. It's going to be an imperfect time. Have patience with yourself. Have patience with your teammates. And yeah, happy working from home. Hopefully, it's a good experience for you, or at least one that you're willing to keep trying at. If we can have that be the result, that'll probably be good. Thanks, everybody.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.